right, here goes. So I'm here to talk to you guys about the unofficial Ember Testing guide, and I do want to start off with two confessions. And the first one is I'm really nervous, and I've never done this before, so I need everybody to just give me a, you're going to do great, Eric, all right? 1, 2, 3. All right. Didn't help. Okay, didn't help. All right, the second part is that I've only been testing my Ember applications for about 3 or 4 months. And from what I've been hearing, talking to people, I think I'm kind of an old fogey now, which is great for me. So a little bit about myself. My name is Eric Berry. I tweet at Coderberry. I have tweeted in the past at CavNeb, but that became really hard to tell people what it meant, so I switched to Coderberry. My GitHub is CavNeb. I work for Instructure, which is the best company in the world to work for. If you guys are interested in working there, contact any of us. We are awesome. And I run the Ember Salt Lake community, Ember Salt Lake City meetup. One more thing is I've been getting a lot of people coming up to me and saying, dude, you don't look like your avatar. Andy Matthews came up to me and was like, dude, you don't look anything like it. But you know how Alex was talking about how he looks in the mirror every day and sees that? That's what I see. So screw you guys, I'm that hot. Okay, all right. This isn't about me, though. This is about you guys. I've really come to care about all of you over the last few days. I've gained a sense of family, and it kind of has added a little bit more depth to what I wanted to present on today. So we all, as Embereños, we want to be good, right? We want to be excellent developers. We want to have we want to be responsible. We also want to be productive. And to be honest, that's why we chose Ember, right? Because Ember makes us the most productive we can be. So, on top of that, we want to be confident in our code. And along with confidence, we're going to need to do some stuff. It takes a little bit on our part. So, about a year ago, we had a visit from Eric Briniclaus, right? So he came, and he said, hey, everybody. Oh. By the way, when I photoshopped this, I didn't have to touch his beard. So, so he came, and he gave us Ember Testing. And right along that, the Ember Testing guide was born. And that was roughly about a year ago. So I wanted to say happy birthday and thank you to everybody who helped on that. If we can give a round of applause to all those people that did work on that, it's important. So, how do we test? I want to cover two main aspects. So, again, I told you that about 3 months ago, about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, I submitted for this talk, and stupid me, part of when I submit for a talk or submit to present on anything, I'm like, oh, this is what I really want to learn about. So, I probably spent about 14 hours a day, and I gained 15, no joke, I gained 15 pounds preparing for this talk. So, but I learned a lot, and so my goal is to provide this information to you guys. I wanted to collect all this stuff, because right now, as you can see on this is what we have for testing, and to me that wasn't much of a story. It's great, but it's not much of a story. So the first part of testing is assertions. Now, an assertion is testing the state of your code. So it is, okay, so assertions let us test the state of our code, and Ember has chosen as its default assertion library QUnit. And QUnit looks like this. There's a module, and in the module we have a setup and a teardown, and then we have our tests that follow the module. And then in that setup and teardown, we call code that will run before and after, and that's what we call the callbacks. So QUnit also provides assertions. These assertions, I'm sure you've all seen before. They're very common across all the different languages. So we get our assertions, and I'm going to make a lot of assumptions today. I'm going to assume that I can read all of your minds. And one of the things that you might be thinking is this. So Ember has this weird relationship with QUnit where, I mean, you can just see them like frolicking down the fields and holding hands. And what's sad is that Jasmine and Mocha feel really left out. They're back there like, aw. And so I'm here to dispel this myth. So here's the fact. So Ember's paving the way. They're paving the happy path with QUnit, but we're not excluding others. But this talk, and you're going to see that currently where we're at, the happy path is led by QUnit. And we'll be able to, I know, this is all done on my iPad, by the way, so. T-shirts will be available. So Ember's providing the happy path using QUnit, but it's being built in a way that we can create other adapters. So we're still figuring it out. And once it's all figured out, we're going to say, okay, let's create the rest of them. So back to assertions. That's half of the testing. But the other half is helpers, right? I'm gonna stretch this far. You're going to see that guy all over the place. So, helpers help us guide our application to a state where we want to perform an assertion. So we have our helpers, and we have our assertions. So here's an example of an Ember test. And an Ember test usually always starts with setup for testing. And in setup for testing, there's two things that happen. It defers the readiness of the application, and it also sets the router's location to none. So that makes it so we can rerun tests without having it do weird stuff. And then we call inject test helpers, and what that'll do is it'll inject all of these helpers that Eric Bryn and all the other people brought us and put them available on the Windows scope so that we can use them. Then we have our test. So you can see our helpers. We have a couple of helpers here, and I'm not going to talk about them right now, but you can see we have a couple of helpers, and then inside there we have a couple of assertions, and that is exactly what happens. So to summarize, Ember provides the helpers. Ember test provides the helpers. QUnit provides the assertions. So back to Briniclaus. He brought us 6 helpers. They're visit, fill in, click, and then find and key event. And there are 2 types of helpers that these provide. So we have a group of asynchronous helpers, and these helpers, what they do is they will wait for the preceding helpers that were triggered to finish before they run, and then they'll run. So it's kind of like a queue. Then we have our synchronous helpers, which run instantly. And then we have this weird helper over here. And he's not any weirder than the other guy, but I mean, and so we have an and then helper. And the and then, what it'll do is it will wait for all of the preceding asynchronous helpers to complete before continuing. So it's basically, oh, hold up here. All right, now we can go. So here's an example of a test that I tried to include all of them, but I couldn't include all of them, so I'm not going to talk about key event. And I had a slide in here that's saying key event may be grumpy, but that's going to make you think like I'm negative, but I'm not negative, so we're not going to talk about key event. All right, moving on. So we have a test where we want to add a new post, so we visit the URL, then we fill in an input field, then we click a button, and then we call and then, which is our weird helper. Then we'll wait for all of those proceeding to finish, and then once that's done, we can go inside and perform our assertion. And inside of our assertion, we call a synchronous helper, instant helper, to be able to get that information. So is everybody with me so far? It's not hard. So far, this is Ember testing. And Ember testing is, and tell me who has this going through their mind when I do this. No, teamwork! Right? All right. So, all right, I'm not nervous anymore. This is fun. Okay, so now we understand the importance of helpers and what they do for us. What happens if we want to create custom helpers? We can do that. So there's two types of helpers we talked about, the asynchronous and the synchronous. This is how we create a synchronous helper. Very simple. It's ember.test.register_helper. And inside here, you can see that we're registering a helper that will look up the router and then get the URL from, basically this is the complicated code that you have to do to get the current URL. So you may have a helper like that in your code that does that. So here is a way that we can create an asynchronous helper. And one of the tests that I had to write, I have a form where I wanted to submit the form, but I don't have a submit button because it's a search form. So I'm like, how do I submit that? So I created a asynchronous test helper, which allows me to just pass in the selector, and then it'll pass that along and do that. So that's how you create a asynchronous helper. And with the asynchronous helper, or any helpers, when you register a helper, you got to remember that you still have to call app.injectTestHelpers because it will not register and it won't be part of your test suite until you do that again. So if you add more, you got to do it more. Got it? So still, we good? Everything pretty good? So again, I'm going to make an assumption of what you guys are thinking. Is that it? No. Now I'm going to take questions. Talk is over. No, I'm just kidding. So, is that it? Everything that I've shown you so far, in bits and pieces, has been presented on before. There's nothing new. So, I wanted to talk to you about Ember 1.5. There's some additions that were added in Ember 1.5 that I'm really excited to talk about. But again, let's bring this back to you guys. This talk is about you. It's about us. It's about making it so that we can provide the best code possible and have the best experience possible with Ember. This is about us making Ember the best. So, I hear jingle bells. Ching, 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 ching. Oh, here comes Robert Jackson Claus. He brought us more helpers. Yay, that's just what I wanted. So, I like to call these helpers the next generation of helpers. So, all right, so we got trigger event. We have current route name, current path, and current URL. So trigger event's pretty easy. It was actually used already on the back as a private method, but now it's exposed in 1.5. You can currently use it with beta. Trigger event takes 3 arguments, the first one being the selector, the second one being the event, and then the third one being any additional arguments that you might, in additional context you might need. So you can see we're using it here. Current route name. So I put on the very bottom here on the slide the way you used to have to do it. So I figured that would probably be the best way to explain, like, this is awesome because that sucks, right? Same thing with the current path. And also we have current URL. So you remember I showed an example in registering a synchronous helper with current URL. Well, I did that just to make you guys think, ooh, that's hard. And now it's easy. So again, I'm going to make another assertion here. A lot of you guys might, well, some of you guys might be thinking, the Hansel's so hot right now, right? The people who laughed, seen the movie. Those who haven't. So, is there more? Well, there was a talk given last week at the Mountain West Ruby conference, and Julian Simeone, I apologize if I messed his name up, gave a presentation where he quoted that integration tests prove your communication, unit tests prove your code. So I want to talk about the first part, how integration tests prove your communication. And to do that, I wanted to show an example that hopefully is a visual thing that triggers a feeling. One of them might be, cucumber sucks. But maybe not, I don't know. The other thing is that this is a flow, right? So oftentimes we call this BDD. And to be able to test this, we'd use integration tests. So let's go back to this. And why don't we convert this to code? So we have an example where we visit a URL, we fill in the search field, we type in a filter, and then we assert that the results only show what we're doing, right? Simple, right? So why don't we look, let's delve a little bit deeper. and say, oh, you know what? We're actually doing this in 2 spots. So we're doing the same thing for users as we are for our posts. So let's delve deeper and find out what we're doing in the code. So inside the code, if we look at both controllers, we're extending app.filterable array mixin. So, oh, all right, well, we got 2 tests testing one thing. So let's take a look and see. Okay, there, focused. Boom, next slide. So now let's look at filterable array mixin. So you can see what happens is on the controller, or on the template for that controller, when filter text changes, it'll trigger this. Now the problem that we have is that this is very difficult to test in isolation. Right now, we would have to write an integration test for every part, and we would have to basically guide the application to that point, emulate the whole experience, and count the number of list items on that. But is that really what we're testing? No, we're testing the mix-in on this part. So that's what we call unit testing, and unit testing is where we prove our code. So I'm going to make a confession to you guys, and I think a lot of you already know this. She is pissed. It's not fun. And I want to explain why it's not fun. But first, to understand why it's not fun, you have to understand a little bit more about Ember. And a lot of you might know this. This might be a recap for you. But let's talk about the container and how Ember works. So let's say this is our container. Or this is our application. It contains controllers, routes, views, all this different stuff. And the container is what holds all of this. So there's been a lot of talk recently about the resolver. And to me, I'm a visual guy. I have to understand this. And so the resolver finds stuff, finds stuff in confusion, right? So who's the one person in the world that you know always knows where everything is in the whole wide world? It's your mom. So we have our resolver, right? Now, the problem is, on every single one of our tests, we are dumping the entire container on top of it. So how do we test in isolation when we have all of this stuff on top of there? So again, this is about you guys. By the way, thank you for everybody for humoring me, letting me take your photo last night. It was a blast. And thank you for the sponsors who did that. It was awesome. So, have you guys been good? Here comes Santa Claus. Here comes Santa Claus. Here comes Ryan Florence Claus. And Stefana Claus, but it's a one-headed guy. So, introducing EmberQ unit. So EmberQ unit is a library written by a bunch of very smart people, not myself. And what this does is it allows you to perform unit tests without loading the entire container. It is inspired by RSpec, and it's packaged for all of these different, all of those, right? Common JS, AMD, named AMD, and globals. And globals is important, right? So if you think about it, like, how do you test Ember applications using globals? It's hard because everything's on the app namespace. Well, guess what? They figured it out. And Ryan's awesome enough to let me present it to you instead of him. So thank you, Ryan. The best thing is it's easy. Everything I've shown you so far is not hard. There's a stigma around Ember testing that it's hard. It's not. The problem is it's unknown. So I wanted to share with you the story of how to do this. So every example that I'm going to show you, there's going to be a JS bin. And I didn't want to BS you guys. So every single JS bin you see is a functional version of a unit test that you can run right now. Okay? So let's first talk about setup. Setup for globals is easy. When you include EmberQ unit, it gives you a global object called EMQ. And EMQ has a function called globalize. And it'll take all of those helpers and put them onto the Windows scope. So there's that slide, which I forgot to click to. All right, now, here is the resolver. It also requires a resolver. And if you are running it in global, you have to set the resolver this way. If you don't, it will conflict with Ember data. or it'll conflict with something. So you have to do it that way. Modules are a little bit easier. The only difference is instead you import the resolver, an existing resolver, and then you just do it. This is an ES6 example. So let's talk about what it provides. So instead of providing test helpers, I like to call them module helpers. So now back to that slide where we had all of the, the sad Jasmine and the sad Mocha. We have sad Jasmine and Mocha here. But what we're doing is we're providing the happy path. We're providing a way that can be replicated into other testing frameworks. So we have module 4, we have module 4 component, and we have module for model. Now before I get into those, I want to explain how this works and why it's important. So module 4 would replace module on your QUnit test. And the first argument would be whatever the resolver needs to look it up. So it goes into module 4, that passes to the resolver. The resolver looks over, oh, sorry, right here we have this little, all right, so I'm try and research an image that represents an isolated container. What better to represent an isolated container than a sad-looking bowl on feet, right? That's an isolated container. So the module 4 has its own isolated container. It contacts the resolver, or it talks to the resolver, says, oh, hey, resolver, I need you to pull this off of the container. That will pull it back into this isolated container. And now in each one of our tests, we're going to have a function called subject. And this function it aliases the create on whatever factory we're testing. So in this case, we have route index. So it's going to pull in the route index factory. We're going to create it with this.subject, and then we can test it that way. Extremely simple. And what's the best part about it is at the very end, it dumps the container. So we have a very nice little sandbox of a container. So yeah, let's hear it for those guys that worked on this. I think it's great. All right, enough. Okay. So module 4 works this way. You pass it a full name, description, and callbacks. In addition to the normal setup and teardown of callbacks, you can also pass it a needs. I will show an example of that in a minute. So how do you unit test routes? Very simple. We have an index route. In this, it's the most basic of models. It returns red, green, blue. So we'd call module 4 route index. And in our test, we'd say var route equals this index. And now we can test that function, and nothing else is loaded. It's simple. Okay. It hits the resolver. Sorry, I really need to stick to the script here. Hits the resolver, comes back, provides this.subject, and does that. So we have our assertion dude on the bottom. Okay, controllers. Now we have a controller. This is a little bit different of a setup. So we have a controller, here, application controller, which contains a user. And then we have a profile controller, which has a dependency on the application controller. So how do we test the profile controller and still bring in that dependency? Well, that's where needs comes in. So here's our test. So we have our module 4 with profile controller as our name. And then we pass in a needs array, which says, hey, mom, go get the rest of these too, and bring them back into our container. So now we have a container that contains 2 objects. So it returns back, and now we have this.subject, which will, again, it aliases the create of whatever we're testing. And then you can see we can get app controller the exact same way, and now we can perform our tests. Really, really simple. Module for component. This is really cool. So instead of passing in the full name that you would, you pass in the name that you would use in your handlebars or whatever it would be. So here we have a pretty color component. And in this you can see that we have a style that changes based on the color that you pass it. So here's a test. And you can see we pass in pretty color, which is the name of the component. Goes to the resolver comes back and says, okay, now you have this available, and when you call this.subject, it will create an instance of that component. But what also happens is the resolver will go out and look and see, is there also a handlebars template with the same name? So it'll load it for you. So you don't need to do any of that stuff. So now you come in, and you can see we can perform the search. Now, the first time you call dollar parens, it will render that to your view. There's also this.append, which is the same thing. So that's what we tested. Now, John K. Paul, he gave me a challenge. So if you guys are interested, the component that he wrote yesterday and showed, this is full test coverage of that component, completely isolated, and I think it's pretty cool. Module for model, same thing. You give it the name. Oh, I need to hurry. You give it the name, and here is a Ember model. Same thing with testing. You give it the name that would be used in this.store.find or whatever. It goes out. It comes back. Now, the difference here is that when I call this.subject, it aliases create record. But same thing. You can go in, and now we can go there. And at the very end, it dumps the isolated container out, so it's completely empty. You can get this right now. This is the URL. And you can install it with Bower install Ember Q unit. It's already included in Ember App Kit. It's already a part of Ember CLI. And there is one more thing. We're completely redoing the testing guide. So that is a link to the pull request. I have a bunch of things that I'd like to get done on it, and hopefully we'll have this thing done soon. I wanted to say thank you to all the people that helped me prepare, and I wanted to say I'm sorry to those who I nagged constantly about it. I also want to give special thanks out to all the spouses, the partners, all of those people who when you work on open source and your significant other doesn't see money coming in for it, they're like, why? And I've heard somebody say that when you work open source, your spouse leases you out. And so I wanted to personally thank all of those people that do that. It's amazing. And my wife said, you cannot go to another conference for a long time. So thank you for making this one good, because I'll remember it. All right. Do you have any questions? That's not Photoshopped. That's not Photoshopped. Yes? It's a poster in my room, man. Yeah? Any options for Factory Girl? Are you talking about being able to mock out like API responses? Yeah. So, Brian Donovan, release it. Okay. Sounds like you need to talk to Brian Donovan. It's that type of stuff is being built into Ember CLI. It's already part of Ember App Kit. There are different ways to do it. I don't think there's any fixed way yet, but yeah, there are many ways to do that. But that's more along the lines of, there's a part in the guide which is testing XHR, and I'd like to show you how to do that using different methods. And that would be one of them. Any other questions? Yes? Oh, yeah, Andy. I don't know the answer to the second part. I've been doing everything with beta 1.5. As far as does it test Ember data? Okay. Okay, so the question was, what's the earliest version of Ember? And the answer is 1.3. Okay, the other part is, does it test Ember data? The Ember, or the module for model is specifically for Ember data. So, any other questions? Yes, absolutely. How many questions can I take? Yes?
You mentioned that it can pull in controllers that it needs. Does it pull in the real controller, or does it do some sort of mocking?
I believe it pulls in the real controller off the container that you pass it. So you would set the resolver to be able to look at the existing container, and then it would pull the controller off of that. It would be the real controller, as far as I understand. Yeah, back there. Joe.
I just want to say
Uh-huh.
Complaints about testing and like how hard it is. So I just wanted to get an extra round of applause to you. Show us all how to do it.
Thank you, thank you. Big hug. You guys are great.